Hello everyone, Trevor May, VRF and Duct-Free Split Technical Specialist here, back for another tech tip. On this tech tip mini series, we're going to be focusing on troubleshooting thermistors in a ductless system. This is usually a pretty straightforward one, but one that I definitely wanted to cover to ensure that guys know how to use not only their meter to troubleshoot a thermistor, but also understand that there are specific features on the high wall style unit that make it really easy to see into what the actual sensor is reading without tearing the indoor unit apart to try to get to the coil thermistor or the return air thermistor. So we want to confirm what kind of indoor unit that we have. Now you can see on here there's E4, E5, F1, F2, and F3 codes. Now, of course, depending on where you're reading this code at is going to give you the appropriate description of what the code is. There are codes at the outdoor unit, which are typically F codes, and at the indoor unit are the E codes. But again, you always want to reference your indoor service manual to make sure that you are troubleshooting the right code, and more importantly, that you have the correct service manual to read the code so you know that you're going after the correct code. Okay. In this particular circumstance, I really don't think that a flowchart is necessary for this, but of course, just like with the other tech tips that I've done prior to this, you can always reference your flowchart to figure out where you need to start and get you on the right path to troubleshooting specific components. Now, in this case, on your temperature sensors, on the cassette, ducted, and floor console style units, you're going to want to go ahead and find whether you have an issue with your indoor coil thermistor, which you can have issues with a T1 sensor, which is your room temperature or return air. You can have issues with a T2 sensor, which is your indoor coil temperature. You could have issues with a T3, which is your outdoor coil temperature, T4, which is your outdoor air temperature, and then finally your T5 sensor, which is your compressor discharge temperature sensor. Okay, now the only difference between these sensors and using an own chart in the service manual is you want to make sure that it has a different resistance reading or resistance amount for the T5 sensor. Okay, the indoor temperature sensor are 5K thermistors. The compressor discharge is a 10K, so you want to make sure that you have appropriate chart. If you have a compressor discharge temperature sensor error, when you're in the service manual, make sure that you have the chart that is specifically noted at the top is saying for the T5 sensor or the compressor discharge temperature sensor. Otherwise, your readings aren't going to be accurate to what it actually is reading. Okay, so want to make sure that you find your service manual. If you don't have your service manual with you or nothing is available, of course, you can always shoot me an email and give me a call, and we can walk you through based on what kilo ohm reading that you're reading that correlates to a specific temperature that that sensor is reading. Of course, the general rule of thumb, plus or minus 2 degrees, and is an acceptable range for that sensor. Any less or any more than that, then you can confirm that that sensor either one is not reading properly, or two is picking up on either too much cold air or too much warm air from an external source. And we want to make sure that we verify that that's not the case, because we don't want to misdiagnose a sensor, replace it with a brand new one, and then the issue is still there because of an external source causing the sensor to read too high or too low, depending on what mode that we're running in. Now, I have a video on here of the high wall units. So the high wall units have a unique feature on them, one that I'm personally a fan of and one that I hope to see come to the other products in the ductless line, such as the cassette, ducted, and floor consoles. With the high wall units, because they have a digital display on the front side, there is an advanced service feature menu and also a point check function. Now, the advanced service menu, you can get in there and program fan speeds to shut off after set point. You can program offsets on thermistors. And the nice part about that is that's available on all of the indoor units. The point check function is only available on the 40 MAQ, the 40 MHH, and the 40 MPH model high wall indoor units. Now that is the 40 MHH being the entry tier, the 40 MAQ with being the mid tier. And for those of you that are familiar with the new product that we put out, the 40 MAH, which is actually the model that supersedes the 40 MAQ now, that one also has this feature for the mid tier. And then finally, the high tier in the Infinity series, which is the 40 MPH. All of these have this feature on here because they have that digital display. Now, what you're going to want to do on the service remote, which is the RG57 or the white wireless handheld remote controller with a little orange yellowish on and off button. Okay, that's the remote that you're going to want to have for this. Now with the 40 MAH, which is the one that supersedes the 40 MAQ on the mid-tier series, There is a new wireless remote controller that comes with it. That wireless remote controller will be compatible with this and will also follow the same control features to get into this menu. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to press your LED button on that wireless controller 3 times. You're going to see the display go off, on, off. Then you're going to want to press your swing button 3 times. You're going to see that go on, off, on. After you press the LED 3 times and then the swing 3 times, you're going to wait for about 2 to 3 seconds. You're going to hear an elongated beep followed by what you see right there in this video that I'm going to play for you in a second. That will come up as an R1. A lot of guys ask, well, what's R1? Well, that's actually not an R. So because of the way that that digital display is set up, the T1, which we know T1 being the return air sensor, actually displays as an R1. So it could be a little bit confusing, but just know that where you're starting with is T1, which is your return air sensor. To navigate through different readings that you're trying to get out of there, you hit the LED button once you see this R1. When you see this R1, it will display the R1 followed by a number, typically around 28 to 30 degrees. A lot of guys are, I have a 30-degree return air temperature. No, you have to remember that this is in degrees Celsius because of where the units originated from, which is over in China. So of course they use Celsius versus Fahrenheit, what we use here in the States. So we always need to make sure that whatever we're reading, we're looking at the appropriate code. Now in this case, if we're looking for return air reading, we're going to get into this menu by hitting the LED button 3 times, the swing button 3 times, waiting for that 2 to 3 seconds, and then confirming, okay, I'm looking at T1, so that's return air, and then looking at the number that comes up after the T1, or in this case, the R1 is displayed. Once we have that number, convert it over into degree Fahrenheit, and verify by taking a base room reading with a temperature sensor that you have either on your truck or on your meter, or however you want to take that room air reading, and compare it to what the unit is seeing. And again, plus or minus 2 degrees is always the rule of thumb with these to make sure that you are getting an accurate reading, whether a temperature sensor has failed or is failing and not reading properly, or if there's an external heat source that is causing that sensor to read too high, or if it's an AC, too low. Okay, again, but that's how you get into the menu. You want to navigate through there. If you hit the LED button after seeing this T1 and seeing your number, it would come up as R2, which is T2, which is your indoor coil thermistor. You hit the LED again, that's T3. That's your outside coil temperature. T4, outdoor air temperature. T5, compressor discharge temperature. Okay, so again, you can access all of those readings on these high wall style units. Again, that's the 40 MHH, the 40 MAQ, and the 40 MPH. Without tearing the unit apart, all you essentially need is a wireless handheld remote control and the knowledge to get into this menu, and you can see what the actual unit is displaying. This is typically something that I do with you guys over the phone, or if I'm on site to confirm if we have an overheating issue to see if the sensor is actually picking up on residual heat from the indoor coil to confirm that. Because the nice part about this is if we take a reading for the room air temperature and we say, oh, it's 70 degrees in here, seems like the unit should be reading 70 degrees. We can confirm what the actual unit is seeing because the number that we're seeing on there in degrees Celsius is the number that's being broadcasted back to the outdoor unit and how it makes its decisions based on that reading. So we can see in real time what the system sees, and we can either confirm an issue or we can rule out an issue if we believe it to be with a temperature sensor. So let's go ahead and take a look at the video of what this actually is going to look like when you get into this point check function. Okay, so you can see in that video, in this particular circumstance, this actually was from a job site that we went out. We're having some overheating issues, which ultimately ended up going back to the application, but you can see in that video towards the very end that return air sensor was outside of the unit. What I was doing was going through there and verifying after we relocated the return air thermistor, which at the first go around, we documented as reading about 90 degrees on there. And we knew the room was not 90 degrees, it was about 68. And it was causing the unit to shut off prematurely because it was picking up on that residual heat from the coil. So we moved the sensor, we went back using this feature on here and verified what our coil temperatures were to ensure that we were getting hot gas refrigerant to it. and our T1 reading on there to verify after we move the sensor, is it reading an accurate room temperature within plus or minus 2 degrees. So again, this is just one of the features that you can use from this from a troubleshooting point of view. And this is something that you can use on a maintenance point of view. If you're just going in and you want to verify a coil temperature versus return air temperature, you can essentially do a delta T reading on this because of how close the fan motor and the actual coil are. It's usually within a couple of degrees of what your supply air temperature would be. So without taking out a temperature probe, you can get a T1 and a T2 reading on there and get a delta T on that unit to ensure that the charge is correct on that single zone or multi-zone system. So that's what I have for you guys for troubleshooting these indoor and outdoor thermistors. Again, if you have any questions on anything or something didn't make sense, please feel free to give me a call. My number's up there with my direct extension. Also my email as well. If you feel more comfortable, shoot me an email. If you need to get in touch with a ductless or VRF product manager, their names, emails, phone numbers, and direct extensions are listed below. And of course, if for some odd reason I'm not available, on vacation, or I'm out sick, I'm not your only point of contact. I'm your first point of contact. But if you can't get a hold of me, the gentlemen you see here with their extensions are in our technical service department, and they'd be more than happy to help you while I'm out of the office with any of your ductless or VRF technical support needs. Hopefully you guys took something out of this. Hopefully a little bit more comfortable troubleshooting these indoor and outdoor thermistors, and also using the high wall units with that point check function to be able to confirm if the sensor is reading properly or not reading properly. Look forward to seeing you guys on the next tech tip, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join me here for this episode of Tech Tips.